let's come back closer to home and talk about the Maccabi Tel Aviv ban. This is back in the spotlight because West Midlands police have been hauled repeatedly in front of Parliament to explain their inexplicable and frankly deranged behaviour over this issue. So people may recall that the Maccabi Tel Aviv fans from Israel were banned from attending an away game with Aston Villa. At the time, the police put out this idea that it was because the Israeli fans were thugs, that they were a menace to the local community. We knew that wasn't true. We knew that that was slightly suspect, but it's since emerged that this is based on entirely fabricated intelligence. The police actually knew that they suspected that local Muslims would come armed in the event of Maccabi Tel Aviv fans turning up. They were using AI tools to basically find evidence of matches where Maccabi fans had been violent. These generated matches that simply did not take place, but they were used as further evidence to justify this ban. All of it, Claire, speaks to really, I mean, it's not simply policing errors, but actually a degree of corruption of police being allowed to be influenced by Islamic sectarians who wanted these Israeli fans out of their town, out of the UK, and they simply bowed to the pressure from those groups.
Yeah, I mean, God, this is potentially one of the greatest policing scandals of recent decades. I mean, it's a very big scandal, this. I had to give some credit to Nick Timothy, the Tory MP, but also Ian Austin, the former Labour MPs now in the Lords, who really kind of just gone on and on and on and kind of forced this and really looked into it. And I, there's some credit there. And then it's been picked up by things like the Sunday Times, and they've done some really good journalism on it. So good. I think the thing is that this is instinctively what a lot of us thought had happened, but then you think you're being madly conspiratorial, and then you discover that actually it was worse than you imagined. And it is so frightening that you got into a situation where the narrative simply became the Maccabi fans, these Israeli thugs, cannot be allowed anywhere into the UK because they will lead to destruction and violence. And very quickly you'd get into child murderers and genocide apologists and all the rest of it, because it became that combination of anti-Israel, anti-Zionist. They are all, are responsible for these terrible things that have happened in Gaza and so on and so forth. And it was just extraordinary because you had a situation where somebody like Emily Damari, one of the hostages, who's both a Spurs fan and the Spurs football supporters had all been out really supporting her. But more importantly, is a Maccabi fan. Her family, I mean, they were kind of like, what happened there, right? We were looking forward to going to a match. Aston Villa were, a football team that were a bit like, well, we're not objecting to it. And football fans, generally speaking, do not wander around saying we're frightened of the football fans. I mean, that isn't what happens. So there was kind of attempts at blaming all sorts of things and making out that the community around the ground were frightened of these fans.
Yeah.
Now, at the same time, we'd also all watch the videos of the activists who were absolutely explicitly anti-Semitic in what they were saying about we don't want them here. It's like explicit that they were saying this is a Jew-free area and we don't want them anywhere near it. So we already knew in a way that the police had never challenged that. To find out that they had actually, made up the evidence, but that they'd actually had reports from, is it Amsterdam?
Yeah.
The Amsterdam police that basically explained that most of the stories that were being used about people being thrown in the canal in Amsterdam, actually, it was Maccabi fans who were being thrown in the canal, not Maccabi fans throwing anyone else in them. That they were the victims over in Amsterdam, and not to say that Maccabi fans weren't involved in some pretty brutal fights there, because, there was fights. But that actually the police just sat on that information, and they therefore have completely, explicitly, knowingly lied. And I think that when you then hear about the local community would get armed, this is what we suspected happened in a lot of the, even in the riots in some ways, which is you could see the police say, remember those gangs of lads who basically said, we're coming out with our baseball fans, and they were all kind of odd, and they sort of said, look, if we keep them away from you, will you please doing deals, right? In other words, police
Believe in the mosque.
drop your weapons at the mosque. And then the story would come out that, far right were rampaging around. And we were all watching this thinking it's like being gaslit constantly. Anyway, the outcome of this is people keep saying that the head of West Midlands Police has to resign. And that's fine. And I mean, accountability and all that. And I don't want him to get away with it. Certainly that's true. Can't get away with it, really. But I just think it's deeper than that. It's a far bigger problem. And Birmingham is a city in which you then feel if the authorities in Birmingham are so frightened of what they perceive to be local Islamist-inspired intolerance of Jews, or presumably anyone who doesn't go along with them on Gaza. Well, we know that's true because we all saw what happened during the general election. And Birmingham was pretty febrile, where those gangs were going around saying, don't vote for so-and-so because they, intimidating candidates in the election. The government of the day, Labour, who got in then, admitted that that was happening, said they would tackle it. And then there's a report somewhere on defending democracy that they've never actually dragged out. So I think that it means that we're in serious trouble in lots of cities because the authorities, just like with the grooming gangs, are running scared of being accused of being Islamophobic and so on.
Tom, it's a damning indictment of the entire multicultural state because this is precisely who it empowers, sectarians who are willing to intimidate, to menace, to try and bend the state to its will. And that's precisely what has happened here, empowered by official cowardice, absolutely. But at the same time, this is what, under the kind of banner of Kumbaya and different communities and so on and so forth, you end up with differential treatment and the essentially rewarding people if they are willing to threaten certain forms of action. I think Birmingham, in some respects, is just further along the track than various other parts of the UK. It's not simply that the police are quite clearly unwilling to police, particularly the British Muslim community, or at least the sections of it who want to play this sectarian game, supposedly on behalf of all of the community. I mean, as you said, Claire, we saw that in the wake of the riots, those scenes in Borsley Green in Birmingham, where you had kind of tooled up young Muslim men, masked up, who were menacing journalists who went there, both a Sky News crew and an LBC crew, were threatened. I think the tyres were slashed with one of their radio cars as well, basically chased out of the area. You can see footage where the police cars just kind of do one turn around the roundabout and then sheepishly move on down the road. I mean, this has been obvious to anyone certainly who lives in that city for some time. And the fact that the rot goes deeper because you not only have a police force which is bending over backwards to accommodate these people, but also you have Islamic sectarian MPs in the area, and you also have Islamic sectarians who are basically welcomed in, and you see this in police forces across the country, as advisors for moments like this.
Incredible. Yeah. They went to the mosques to get advice. And mosques who had invited in explicitly political Islamists who are notoriously, notorious in police circles, will be on, one would hope, on somebody's prevent list or terrorism watch list, right? Yeah. They're kind of well known, and they allowed that to happen. I think that the other thing that is kind of gets lost in this, which is understandable, was when the match actually happened. If you remember, there was a bit of a protest.
Yeah,
it was. Oh, you were at that. Well, you can tell this story better than I can then. But what I was going to say was a bit of a protest going on, or vigil, or act of solidarity, and people were held in back. Penned, right, and treated like criminals. And Nick Timothy got involved, and because they were going to the match and they were basically treated like criminals in Austin, treated like criminals, and so thought this can't be right. How has it become such a situation? I think you're really right, Tom, to just emphasize, because there's cowardice, but you can't help but feel that the multicultural police force are broadly sympathetic to the fact that the local Islamist supporting MPs and activists have a point. They haven't instinctively at any point thought, isn't this a bit odd? And so you just know that it's more than cowardice. It's a bit more of a kind of sympathetic, this is the community we serve And any of these outsiders are dangerous. They think it's the Maccabi fans who are the extremists. They think it's the RFI crowd or the campaign against anti-Semitism that's the extremists. They're the ones you kind of want to contain behind a pen.
And having been up there when the match was actually held, obviously without the fans, but Maccabi Tel Aviv did go there and play. It was a really striking demonstration of how very real the sectarian problem is. I mean, there was this pretty large demonstration on one side of Villa Park. As soon as we got there, people chanting from the stage Allahu Akbar and all the rest of it, constantly telling the younger members of the crowd not to be violent, not to mask up. Meanwhile, in the trees that kind of line that side of Villa Park, young men masking up, looking and hoping for trouble, essentially. You then had a lot of kind of Villa fans wandering around furious that they were being redirected so much to get into the ground, and a lot of the pubs were closed. And then, of course, this very courageous but smaller group of British Jews, as well as their allies, who were holding this small demonstration, who had to meet in a car park about 15 minutes walk away, had a police escort that was at least as numerous as they were, and then were ushered in to a caged basketball court, all the while having baby killers and so on and so forth shouted at them from without. So it was a perfect demonstration of the fact that these divides are very real. The point is that as a society you have to confront them, not count out of them, and that is the opposite.
I quite enjoyed on the night, and I don't often say that I enjoy this chant, but was when some of the Aston Villa fans in response started shouting Tommy Robinson, you know. And the reason they did it was not because they were all Tommy Robinson supporters, because they knew it was a kind of alternative to the Allah, you know what I mean? A kind of like a way of saying, I mean, you know, I'm not a great Tommy fan, but it was just more that kind of like, because they were just sort of dragged in. And one point was made was people said, well, a lot of fans stayed away because they were worried about the trouble. But they knew that there wasn't going to be any trouble from Maccabi fans. But actually, that match had been turned into a political football, say the pun. And in a way, it's one of the problems about football being politicized in that way. I mean, just very unhelpful. But yeah, very worrying. Anyway, this is going to run and run. I think this could be a little bit like the Grooming Gang scandal, but it's certainly a very important moment